Welcome back, weary traveler, to the soothing shadows of the 1001 Nights. Tonight, as the stars settle and the world outside grows quiet, we invite you to close your eyes and let the sound of an ancient story guide you into a deep and restful sleep. Forget the worries of the day and prepare to drift away on the gentle currents of an Eastern tale, a story of hidden riches, betrayal, and unexpected courage. This is the beginning of the thrilling legend of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. In a great, bustling city of Persia, there lived two brothers, both born to a humble merchant. When their father passed away, he left his modest wealth equally divided between them. The elder brother was named Cassim. Cassim was a shrewd man, and he quickly used his inheritance to marry a woman who possessed a large, established fortune. Through this marriage and his own keen business sense, Cassim grew immensely wealthy. He became one of the city's most respected merchants, living in a magnificent house adorned with silks and jewels. Yet, despite his prosperity, Cassim was known for his cold heart and his intense, almost obsessive love for money. He often ignored the struggles of those less fortunate, including his own brother. The younger brother was named Ali Baba. Ali Baba was a good-natured, quiet man. His own small fortune was quickly spent, and he was forced to marry a woman who was as poor as himself. To earn a living, Ali Baba took up the difficult trade of a woodcutter. It was a life of hard, daily labor that brought him barely enough money to feed his family. His most prized possessions were his 3 sturdy donkeys, which he relied on every day to carry the wood he chopped. Every morning, long before the sun rose, Ali Baba would prepare his 3 donkeys, tie his axe to his belt, and set out towards the towering silent mountains outside the city walls. One warm, typical morning, Ali Baba rode his donkeys far into the remote forest paths. He worked tirelessly for hours, the monotonous sound of his axe echoing through the quiet woods. By noon, he had cut a large pile of thick, heavy wood, enough to fully load his 3 animals. He tied the wood securely with ropes, ready for the difficult journey back down the mountain slopes. Just as he was preparing to leave, the sound reached his ears, a distant, rhythmic noise that instantly alerted him. It was the heavy tramp of horses approaching rapidly from the hidden path. Ali Baba was a peaceful, timid man, and the sight of a large company in such a remote place filled him with fear. He immediately suspected they were robbers. He quickly drove his 3 donkeys into a dense, hidden thicket of bushes, urging them to remain quiet. He then climbed the nearest large, towering tree, whose thick, wide branches provided him with perfect, safe concealment. From his hidden position, he could observe the entire path without risk of being seen. The sound grew louder until, in a sudden rush of dust and motion, the company arrived at the clearing directly beneath his tree. Ali Baba counted them, 40 men, all mounted on powerful, well-armed horses. They were rugged and fierce-looking, carrying the marks of men who lived by violence and plunder. Each horse was heavily laden with large, bulging sacks, clearly containing stolen, valuable goods. The captain of the band, a huge man with a commanding presence, ordered them to halt. The 40 men quickly dismounted, tied their horses securely to the trees, and then stood in a silent, disciplined formation, waiting for their leader's command. The captain, carrying one of the heavy sacks, walked confidently towards a large, prominent rock face nearby. This rock was utterly smooth and showed no sign of any opening, door, or fissure. The captain stood before the wall of stone, and in a clear, loud voice that cut through the silence of the afternoon, he spoke 2 strange, magical words. "Open Sesame." The moment he spoke, the rock face seemed to melt away. A large section of the solid stone magically slid open with a deep, grinding sound, revealing a wide, dark entrance to a hidden cavern within the mountain. The captain quickly ordered his men, "Hurry, enter and deposit the spoils." The 40 thieves immediately picked up their heavy sacks and filed into the dark mouth of the cavern. The captain was the last to enter. Once inside, he turned back towards the opening and commanded the rock with the opposing secret words, "Shut, Sesame." Instantly, the great stone door slid back into its place, sealing the opening completely. The mountain face was now solid and ordinary once more, leaving no trace of the entrance or the men. Ali Baba remained frozen in the tree, his heart pounding in disbelief. He realized that this cavern was the hidden treasury of the infamous band, the vast storage place for the accumulated wealth of their lives of crime. Ali Baba waited for an unbearably long time, ensuring the robbers would not return. Finally, the rock opened again, and the 40 thieves emerged, now empty-handed, leaving their plunder inside. The captain closed the door with "Shut, Sesame," and the entire band mounted their horses and rode swiftly away, vanishing down the distant path. Once the sound of their horses faded completely, Ali Baba cautiously climbed down the tree. His legs were shaking, but his mind was fixed on the incredible, fantastic secret he had witnessed. He retrieved his 3 donkeys and walked slowly towards the magic rock. He stood before the towering stone, gathering all his courage. He took a deep breath and, imitating the tone of the captain, he spoke the magical command, "Open, Sesame." The moment the words left his lips, the huge rock slid open, revealing the wide, dark entryway. Ali Baba, trembling with awe and excitement, immediately stepped across the threshold and into the deep darkness of the mountain, ready to face the unknown secrets held within the robber's cave. The cavern was vast, far larger and grander than Ali Baba had ever imagined. After his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering from the entrance, he looked around and gasped. The air inside was dry and still, carrying the faint old smell of metal and wealth. The cave was a massive treasury built by years of successful plunder. It extended deep into the heart of the mountain. In one section, fine silks from Damascus and Persia were stacked neatly, rolled up and secured with rich cords. In another, there were towering stacks of fine leather goods, carpets, and rare incense. But the most astonishing sight was the gold. In a remote corner, hidden slightly from the light, were immense piles of gold and silver coins, stored in large, thick leather sacks or lying loosely on the floor. Everywhere he looked, there were glistening mounds of jewels, flawless pearls, and glittering emeralds, a fortune beyond any honest man's wildest dreams. Ali Baba was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the treasure. Ali Baba did not waste time with the silks or the heavy jewels. He was a practical man who needed only enough gold to change his family's life forever. He quickly found the bags he had brought on his donkeys for carrying wood. He opened them, and taking a flat shovel, he began to fill the sacks with the shining gold coins. He did not rush. He worked slowly and methodically, ensuring the weight was evenly distributed across the 3 donkey loads. He wanted enough to permanently lift his family out of poverty, but not so much that it would draw undue attention or slow his escape. When he was satisfied that his sacks were full, he brought them out of the main chamber and secured them tightly. He paused at the entrance, turned back towards the mountain of wealth, and spoke the command that closed the secret away. "Shut, Sesame." The rock face immediately slid shut, sealing the mountain and protecting its fantastic secret once more. Ali Baba quickly loaded the sacks of gold onto his 3 donkeys, carefully covering the heavy sacks with the piles of cut wood. He then led his donkeys down a mountain path, feeling secure and incredibly rich, but still slightly timid about the immense secret he carried. He arrived back at his humble home in the city, driving the donkeys into his small courtyard. He rushed inside to tell his wife the unbelievable, fantastic tale. His wife listened to the story of the robbers, the magical words, and the hidden cave with fear and astonishment. She was overwhelmed, fearing the 40 thieves would surely track them down and murder them both. Ali Baba calmly opened one of the sacks, and when his wife saw the huge pile of shining gold coins pour out onto the floor, her fear was quickly replaced by awe and a kind of nervous excitement. "Husband," she whispered, her voice shaking, "we must know the exact amount of this treasure so we can plan our spending carefully." "Wife," Ali Baba replied, "the count is impossible. The amount is enormous. We must simply be happy that we are rich." But his wife was insistent on knowing the exact measure. Knowing that they had no measuring vessel large enough, she proposed a dangerous plan. "I will go now to the house of your brother Cassim," she announced, "and I will borrow the large grain measure from his wife. We will measure the gold quickly, and then return the vessel before they suspect anything." Ali Baba, weary but trusting, agreed to the plan. His wife quickly hurried to the magnificent house of Cassim. Cassim's wife, who was a proud and curious woman, was surprised by the sudden visit from her poor sister-in-law. "My dear sister-in-law," Ali Baba's wife said, trying to sound casual, "I have come to borrow the large measure that you use for measuring grain. We are in need of it for a short while." Cassim's wife, full of intense curiosity, wondered what possible use her poor relative could have for such a measure. Wishing to find out the secret, she cleverly rubbed a small amount of suet fat on the bottom of the measuring vessel before handing it over. She knew that if anything dry was measured, a tiny piece might stick to the fat, revealing the mystery. Ali Baba's wife, unaware of this small, cunning trap, returned home and quickly filled the borrowed measure with the shining gold coins. They measured the gold hastily, filling the container several times until they had a solid count of the immense treasure. When they were done, Ali Baba's wife rushed back to Cassim's house to return the vessel. But when she handed the measure back, Cassim's wife immediately rushed to examine the bottom. And there, stuck firmly to the piece of suet, was a single, flat, yellow gold coin. Cassim's wife was utterly astonished and filled with a fierce, burning envy. She did not say a word, but waited impatiently for Cassim to return home from his daily business. As soon as Cassim arrived, his wife confronted him, her voice sharp with disbelief and rage. "Cassim, my wealthy husband, you pretend to be the rich man of the family. But your poor brother, Ali Baba, is richer than you. He measures his gold by the bushel, while you count yours by the handful." Cassim, confused and annoyed, demanded to know what madness his wife was speaking. She then showed him the single gold coin stuck to the bottom of the borrowed measure, told him the entire story of her scheme and the discovery. Cassim's astonishment was instantly replaced by a fierce, grasping greed. He could not sleep, think, or eat until he knew the source of his brother's immense, sudden fortune. He resolved that he must immediately confront Ali Baba and force him to reveal the secret. The morning following the discovery of the single gold coin was one of high tension and bitter confrontation. Cassim, consumed by sleepless jealousy and overwhelming greed, waited impatiently for his brother Ali Baba to approach his house. His mind was frantic, constantly calculating the unimaginable value of the treasure Ali Baba was hiding. As soon as Cassim saw his brother, he rushed out, his face twisted with anger and suspicion. He grabbed Ali Baba roughly and dragged him into a private corner of the courtyard, demanding an immediate answer. "You, the poor woodcutter," Cassim hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "You pretend to be a pauper, but you measure your gold by the bushel. Do not deny your sudden, secret wealth. Tell me immediately, by what magic have you become richer than I am? Where did you obtain that vast fortune?" Ali Baba, a man of simple honesty and kind heart, was deeply pained by his brother's harshness and uncontrolled envy. He knew that denying the truth was pointless, as the gold coin was undeniable proof. After a long pause, seeing the intense suffering in his brother's eyes, Ali Baba quietly recounted the entire incredible tale. He described his daily routine, the sudden appearance of the 40 Thieves, his hasty retreat into the towering tree, and the moment the captain uttered the mysterious magical words. He confessed his fear, his awe, and finally, his first visit inside the hidden cave, detailing the stacks of silks and the immense piles of glittering gold. Cassim listened to every word, absorbing the details like a sponge. But his listening was not marked by wonder or gratitude. It was purely marked by cold, analytical greed. He only cared about two details: the location of the rock and the exact pronunciation of the magical command. When Ali Baba finished his account, Cassim's mind was made up. He had no intention of sharing the wealth or even thanking his brother for the life-changing secret. His only thought was to take all the treasure for himself. "Thank you for your honesty, poor brother," Cassim said, though his tone held no sincerity. He dismissed Ali Baba quickly, telling him to go and enjoy his small, petty sacks of gold. Cassim then immediately began his own highly ambitious plan. He spent the rest of the day in a flurry of secretive activity. He did not tell his wife his true plan, but merely informed her that he was undertaking a grand, secretive business journey that would secure the future of their wealth forever. He went to the slave market and quickly purchased 10 strong mules, which he instructed his servants to equip with the largest possible leather sacks and heavy ropes. Cassim's preparation was flawed from the start because it was driven by excessive greed and speed. He was so consumed by the thought of the immense treasure that he overlooked the crucial details. The following morning, before the city was awake, Cassim set out with his 10 mules, guided by his frantic desire to reach the secret cave. He took the utmost care to follow his brother's directions exactly, ensuring he took the correct winding paths up into the quiet mountain wilderness. After hours of travel, Cassim finally located the familiar clearing and the great, towering rock face. He quickly tethered his 10 mules near the small thicket where Ali Baba had hidden his donkeys. Cassim, bursting with excitement and convinced of his imminent, unparalleled fortune, rushed towards the stone. He stood before the sheer rock, his heart racing with greedy anticipation. He took a long, deep breath, and using the words his brother had repeated, he commanded the mountain. Asterisk, open sesame. Asterisk. The rock face instantly obeyed. With a deep, grinding sound, the massive stone door slid open, revealing the dark entrance to the immense treasury. Cassim stepped inside and stopped dead in his tracks. The sight that greeted him was 1,000 times more dazzling than Ali Baba had described. He was literally surrounded by riches. There were not just piles of gold coins, but massive columns of gold, chests overflowing with flawless jewels, silver bars stacked like logs, and rare goods piled so high they nearly touched the cavern ceiling. The amount of wealth was dizzying, overwhelming Cassim's senses. Driven mad by the sight, Cassim did not think of loading his mules carefully. He immediately began running around a cavern, grasping at the most glittering jewels, selecting the finest silks, and tossing huge handfuls of gold coins into the empty sacks he had brought. He was completely lost in the sheer magnitude of the treasure, spending hours running between the different mounds of riches, constantly telling himself that he must take more and more. Finally, having filled as many sacks as he could, the heavy work brought him back to reality. Cassim knew he had enough treasure to make him the wealthiest man in the entire Persian Empire. He stood at the entrance, ready to seal his secret and return home, the victor over his timid brother. But as he looked out at his 10 laden mules waiting patiently in the sun, a cold terror suddenly gripped his heart. In his greedy, frantic haste, and utterly distracted by the overwhelming sight of the gold, Cassim had completely forgotten the magical words required to seal the door. He tried to remember the name of the grain: open barley, open wheat, open rye. He called out every grain he could think of, but the words were wrong, and the rock remained wide open, a silent, gaping mouth to the world. Cassim, realizing he was trapped and utterly exposed, sank to the floor in a fit of trembling, despair, and crushing, unbearable fear. Cassim was left alone inside the mountain cavern, paralyzed by a cold, overwhelming terror. The vast treasure that had filled him with manic excitement now seemed like a deadly trap. He paced frantically between the high stacks of silks and the glittering columns of gold, his mind desperately grasping for the forgotten words. Open barley, open lentil, open wheat, open corn, he shouted, hitting the rock face with his fist. The rock, however, remained silent and unmoving, utterly indifferent to his pleas. He tried every grain and seed he could recall, but the right combination, sesame, remained stubbornly locked away in his mind. He sank to the floor, surrounded by a fortune that would buy the world, yet unable to buy his freedom. His 10 mules stood outside, patiently waiting, but Cassim was a prisoner of his own greed and his faulty memory. Night fell slowly outside the cave, and Cassim spent the hours in utter darkness and increasing despair. Meanwhile, the 40 robbers were returning from their latest expedition. They had successfully raided a wealthy caravan and were riding swiftly back to their secret treasury to deposit their new plunder. As they approached the clearing, the captain immediately noticed something was terribly wrong. The cave door, which they had securely closed earlier that day, was standing wide open. Furthermore, he saw 10 strange mules tethered to the trees, mules they did not own, laden with empty sacks. The captain quickly ordered his men to dismount. They drew their swords and approached the open cave with extreme caution, realizing that their most guarded secret had been compromised. The 40 thieves crept silently into the dark entrance. The cavern was filled with enormous piles of treasure, just as they had left it. But then they spotted Cassim. Cassim, exhausted by his terror and his futile efforts, had huddled himself in the corner, overwhelmed by the darkness. When he saw the 40 terrifying silhouettes of the robbers entering the cave, he realized his doom was sealed. He did not cry out or beg. He simply stood frozen, unable to move. The robbers' captain, seeing a stranger in their private treasury, did not waste a single moment on questions. His anger was absolute. He ordered his men to seize the intruder immediately. The robbers, infuriated by the violation of their secret sanctuary, rushed upon the unarmed Cassim. In their rage and determination to send a brutal message, they killed him swiftly. The captain's command was then chillingly precise. To prevent any single piece of evidence from escaping and to instill maximum fear, he ordered his men to take Cassim's body and cut it into 4 separate quarters. The robbers carried out the gruesome task. They then brought the 4 pieces of Cassim's body and hung them inside the entrance of the cave, 1 piece on each side. The captain intended this horrible sight to serve as a terrifying warning to anyone else who might possess the secret of the magical words and dare to violate their treasury. The vast wealth remained untouched, but the grim execution was complete. After securing their new plunder and ensuring the terrifying display was visible, the captain pronounced the closing command, "Shut Sesame." The rock door slid shut, and the 40 thieves rode away once more, planning their next move to uncover the identity of the person who had shared the secret with the dead man. Back in the city, Cassim's wife was growing increasingly anxious. She had spent the entire night awake, convinced that Cassim was trapped in a cave, but reassured that his immense greed would see him return triumphant the next morning. However, when the sun rose high and then began to set, and her husband had still not returned with his 10 mules, her fear turned into genuine alarm. She knew she could not raise a public alarm, as the matter was connected to Ali Baba's illegal fortune. She rushed to Ali Baba's humble house and began to weep hysterically, confessing her dreadful fear to her brother-in-law. Ali Baba, filled with immediate dread, knew instantly what must have occurred. His kind nature, though deeply frustrated by Cassim's foolish greed, compelled him to act. He promised his sister-in-law that he would go immediately to the mountain and bring back news of Cassim. Ali Baba, filled with profound grief and fear, knew he had no time to waste mourning his brother's terrible fate. He knew the immediate and critical task was to prevent the robbers from discovering their relationship and to ensure Cassim's body received a dignified, honest burial. He had to make the city believe Cassim had died a natural death. The moment he promised help, Ali Baba took his 3 donkeys and, without telling his wife or anyone else, he rode swiftly back up the mountain path. He quickly found the familiar clearing and uttered the magic words. "Open Sesame." The door slid open, and Ali Baba entered the silent cavern. The terrible sight of his brother's body, brutally cut into 4 quarters and displayed as a warning, confirmed his worst fears. Ali Baba wept briefly, but then his practical nature took over. He immediately took down the gruesome remains, wrapped them carefully in a fine piece of cloth he found among the plunder, and placed the large bundle on the back of one of his donkeys. He quickly collected his 10 brothers' mules, which were still patiently waiting. He did not touch any of the treasure, for he had lost all desire for additional wealth. He covered Cassim's body with his own pile of wood and led the mournful procession of 13 animals back down the mountain towards the city. He returned home and drove the mules, still laden with the empty sacks, straight into Cassim's magnificent courtyard. He then rushed into Cassim's house to speak privately with his sister-in-law. Ali Baba found her still weeping bitterly. He handed her the terrible bundle containing her husband's remains and explained the necessity of absolute secrecy. He warned her that if the robbers suspected his involvement or his relationship to Cassim, they would surely face the same end. The sister-in-law, terrified by the gruesome truth, calmed herself enough to understand the danger. She promised absolute secrecy, but she confessed that she needed help to dispose of the body without arousing suspicion, as it was now in 4 pieces. "You have one solution," Ali Baba told her. "You must trust the ingenuity of Morgiana." Morgiana was the clever, loyal, and fearless slave girl belonging to Cassim's household. She was known for her quick wit and total devotion to her mistress. The sister-in-law immediately called Morgiana into their presence. Ali Baba and the sister-in-law confided the terrible truth to the slave girl. Cassim had died a violent death, and his body was now dismembered. They needed her help to make the entire city believe Cassim had died peacefully of a sudden illness, and that the funeral would proceed as normal. Morgiana listened without flinching. She immediately understood the gravity of the danger and the necessity of the deception. "Master," she said, looking straight at Ali Baba, "leave the matter entirely to me. I will prepare a plan." Her first task was to secure the remains. She went to a shop and purchased the necessary materials for a sophisticated medical deception. Then she went to the house of an old, skilled tailor named Baba Mustafa, who lived in a very remote part of the city. Morgiana presented herself before the tailor. She carefully wrapped a piece of gold coin in a silk cloth and offered it to him. "Baba Mustafa," she said quietly, "I need your help in a matter of utmost secrecy. You must come with me now. You will be blindfolded, and you must do exactly as I command. If you ask a single question, I will kill you. But if you do exactly as I ask, you will be rewarded with more gold than you have ever seen." Baba Mustafa, though old and fearful, was tempted by the gold. He agreed. Morgiana blindfolded him, and with great caution, she led him through the winding streets until they arrived at Cassim's house. Inside the quiet house, Morgiana took the tailor into the room where the 4 pieces of Cassim's body were laid out. She then removed the blindfold. "Your task," she instructed, "is to sew these 4 pieces back together swiftly and perfectly using the strongest thread. You must not speak a word, and you must not ask whose body this is." Baba Mustafa, horrified by the sight, took the second piece of gold to calm his nerves and began the gruesome task immediately. Morgiana watched him closely until the body was fully sewn together and looked, at a distance, like a whole man. She then blindfolded the tailor again, paid him another piece of gold, and led him back to the exact spot where she had first met him, ensuring he could never know the location of Cassim's house. The first step of the deception was complete. Morgiana had created the illusion of a whole body. Her next task was to prepare the city for the sudden illness and death of Cassim. Morgiana's mind was sharp and meticulous, understanding that the deception must be carried out slowly and convincingly to fool the watchful neighbors. The gruesome sewing task was only the beginning. Now she had to stage a long illness. The day after the tailor completed his work, Morgiana began her slow, deliberate performance. Early in the morning, She went out quietly to an apothecary's shop in a distant quarter of the city. She purchased a strong, potent medicine, one that was typically prescribed for the most serious of stomach illnesses. She told the apothecary, with a grave face and a somber voice, that her master, Cassim, was suffering severely and was barely clinging to life. She returned to the house and then, throughout the rest of the day, she went back to the same apothecary and also to a different one across the city, buying the same medicine repeatedly, each time expressing more anxiety and sadness. This created a clear trail of evidence, suggesting to anyone who saw her that Cassim had been terribly ill for some time. For the next 2 nights, Morgiana ensured that every movement in Cassim's house was slow and quiet, mimicking the atmosphere of a home where someone is desperately ill and nearing death. She often stood outside the main door, weeping softly and shaking her head gravely when neighbors inquired about her master's health. On the 3rd day, Morgiana emerged from the house and let out a sudden, loud, and heart-wrenching wail of despair, a cry that was immediately recognized by the entire neighborhood as the sound of a death announcement. She struck her face repeatedly with her palms and tore at her hair in a traditional display of profound grief. The neighbors, having witnessed Morgiana's supposed struggle to save her master over the last 2 days, immediately rushed to her side to offer their condolences. They all believed that Cassim had died a natural death, succumbing to the fierce illness they had heard about. Morgiana then directed the preparations for the funeral with great authority and solemnity. She hired the official funeral washers to prepare the body, ensuring that they worked quickly and carefully, and she gave strict instructions that the body should be heavily scented and wrapped tightly in a thick shroud before the washing began. This was necessary to conceal the poor quality of the tailor's hurried sewing job and prevent the washers from noticing the seams. The sister-in-law, Cassim's widow, played her role perfectly, sitting within the house and weeping continuously, refusing to speak or receive comfort, maintaining the facade of a heartbroken widow. Finally, the grand funeral procession began. The body of Cassim was placed in a large, open coffin, covered entirely by thick, fine fabrics. Ali Baba walked at the head of the procession, his face contorted in a convincing mask of grief. He was followed by Cassim's widow and a large company of mourning neighbors and merchants, all walking slowly towards the public cemetery. The scene was long, somber, and completely believable. Cassim was buried with all the honors due to a wealthy merchant, and the elaborate funeral satisfied every detail of the city's expectations. The deception was a complete success. The entire city was convinced that Cassim had died naturally, and the robbers' plan to use his dismembered body as a public warning had been foiled. Following the mandatory mourning period, Ali Baba took the second necessary step to secure his family and his sister-in-law. It was a custom of the time that for a woman to be protected and provided for, she should marry her closest surviving male relative. Ali Baba, though with some reluctance, married his brother's widow and arranged for his own family to move immediately into Cassim's large and magnificent house. Ali Baba now possessed 2 fortunes: Cassim's legitimate commercial wealth, and his own secret, hidden supply of gold from the robber's cave. Though they now lived in great luxury, Ali Baba and his wife were careful to conduct their lives with humility and discretion. They rarely discussed the secret of the cave, maintaining absolute silence about the circumstances of Cassim's death. But Ali Baba knew the danger was not over. He knew the 40 thieves would soon return to the cave, and when they discovered that the warning body was gone, their anger and their hunt for the person who knew their secret would begin in earnest. Many days passed after Cassim's funeral. Ali Baba and his family now settled into the comfortable luxury of Cassim's grand house, maintained a quiet, cautious existence, hoping the terrifying incident was finally closed. Meanwhile, the 40 thieves, unaware of the clever deception, returned to their secret mountain hideout after a long and highly successful raiding expedition far to the north. They came back laden with heavy sacks of gold, spices, and rare merchandise, ready to deposit their new plunder. The captain dismounted and, standing before the sheer rock face, he commanded, as always, "Open Sesame." The rock slid open, and the robbers filed inside. The moment the captain entered, he paused, his eyes fixed on the entrance walls. He immediately realized the awful truth. The 4 pieces of Cassim's body that they had left as a terrifying warning were gone. The captain's face twisted into an expression of cold fury. He knew instantly that their secret was in grave danger. He quickly summoned his men. "Comrades," he roared, his voice echoing in the cavern, "our secret is known to another." The warning was stolen, and the pieces of the body were taken away. This confirms that the dead man was not alone, but that another, perhaps a brother or close friend, knows the magical words. The robbers, stunned and enraged, agreed that they must immediately find the second person before their entire treasury was emptied. The captain quickly formed a plan. One of us must venture into the city disguised as a merchant. Find out which house has recently experienced a sudden secret of death, followed by a quiet, hasty funeral. The man who removed the body must live there. Find his house, mark the door with a special sign, and return to us quickly. We will then enter the city together tonight and execute him." One of the bravest and most cunning of the thieves volunteered for this deadly mission. He quickly changed into the humble robes of a traveling oil merchant, entered the city, and began to wander through the winding streets and crowded bazaars. The thief was clever. He did not ask direct questions, but merely listened to the constant flow of gossip that permeates every marketplace. He soon heard whispers about a wealthy merchant named Cassim, who had died suddenly of a grave illness. The talk mentioned the grand funeral and the curious circumstances surrounding his sudden death. The thief concluded immediately that this Cassim must be the dead man from the cave, and that the person who removed the body was now residing in Cassim's house. The thief was determined to find the exact location of the house. As he wandered through the neighborhood, his attention was caught by a peculiar sight. He saw an old, solitary tailor, Baba Mustafa, sitting on his bench, working diligently but muttering strangely to himself. The thief approached the tailor and greeted him warmly. "Old man," the thief inquired, "you seem to be muttering about some great wonder. What occupies your mind so completely?" Baba Mustafa, being old and somewhat talkative, could not resist sharing his amazing secret, especially when the thief pressed him and offered him a piece of gold. "Sir," the tailor whispered, leaning in closely, "I have seen things no other man in this city has seen. Just a few days ago, a beautiful young slave girl blindfolded me and led me to a house in this very quarter where I was forced to sew a dead man back together. A dead man cut into 4 quarters. The thief's heart leaped with success. He knew this must be the house. The thief feigned astonishment and asked the tailor to repeat the story several times, offering more gold until Baba Mustafa, now highly excited, agreed to take the thief to the house. Since the tailor had been blindfolded, he could not remember the route, but he could vaguely sense the path. The thief agreed to be blindfolded and held the tailor's hand as the old man walked, carefully retracing the steps he had taken with Morgiana. Finally, the tailor stopped and declared, "This must be the house. This is where the blindfolding stopped." The thief removed the blindfold and stood before the magnificent house, the house of Cassim, now occupied by Ali Baba. He quietly thanked the tailor, gave him a final large gold coin, and quickly dismissed him. The thief then pulled a piece of white chalk from his pouch and drew a clear, small white mark on the wooden door of Ali Baba's house, a secret signal that the house contained the second person who knew the secret. Satisfied with his work, the thief rushed back to the mountain hideout to deliver the great news to the captain. The thief, satisfied with the white chalk mark on Ali Baba's door, rode back to the mountain cave and gave a triumphant report to the captain. He described finding the old tailor and forcing him to point out the magnificent house where the new secret of wealth resided. The captain was delighted by the news. He praised the thief's cunning and immediately ordered the entire band to prepare for the attack. They waited until the darkness of night had fully settled over the city, and then the 40 robbers, disguised as ordinary merchants, rode down towards the city, led by the thief who had marked the door. Meanwhile, back at Ali Baba's house, the slave girl Morgiana, the loyal guardian of the family, was preparing to step out briefly. She was carrying out the evening chores and fetching water from a neighboring well. As she opened the large wooden door to step onto the street, her eyes fell upon the strange, clear white mark that had been drawn on the wood. Morgiana was instantly alarmed. Her mind, sharp and quick, understood immediately that this was not a random mark. It was a sinister signal connected to Cassim's strange death and the forbidden secret. She knew that the mark meant danger, that the thieves had found the house. She stood still for a moment, thinking calmly and carefully. She realized that simply erasing the mark was not enough, as the thieves would know the house had been warned. She needed a plan to entirely confuse and mislead the robbers. Morgiana quickly rushed back inside the house and secured a piece of white chalk identical to the one used by the thief. She then set out into the street. She began walking slowly down the length of the street, which was lined with nearly identical large wooden doors belonging to the houses of other wealthy merchants. With meticulous care and a steady hand, Morgiana drew the exact same white chalk mark on every single door on the entire street. She marked the door next to theirs, and the one after that, and the one after that. She walked to the opposite side of the street and marked every door there as well. Her aim was to create a confusing visual pattern that destroyed the thief's unique signal. She worked slowly and methodically in the darkness, taking great pains to ensure every mark was precisely the same size and height as the original. The process was painstaking, but she knew the safety of her master's entire family depended on this silent, desperate effort. When she was finally finished, the entire neighborhood was uniform. 40 or 50 doors all bore the same white signal. Satisfied with her work, Morgiana returned home and went about her chores as if nothing had happened. Later that night, the 40 Thieves rode silently into the city. They dismounted and approached the street where the first thief had drawn his mark. The first thief, immensely proud of his discovery, pointed confidently toward the marked door. "There, Captain," he whispered, "that is the house. You can clearly see the white mark I drew." The captain looked, but his eyes narrowed in immediate suspicion. "I see a white mark, yes," he muttered. "But look around you, fool. The door next to it has the same mark, and the door opposite, and every door down the street, as far as the eye can see." The captain and the first thief walked down the street, inspecting door after door. They were all marked identically. The entire street was a maze of white chalk marks. The thief grew pale with terror, unable to distinguish Ali Baba's house from any other. He could offer no explanation for this disastrous confusion. The captain was instantly consumed by a brutal, cold fury. He had been led into the city, and his entire critical plan was ruined by what appeared to be a gross, unbelievable error. He knew he could not risk the lives of his men by searching the wrong houses. He turned on the trembling thief. "You have ruined our scheme and endangered our secret. Your life is forfeit." Without a moment of pity, the captain dragged the first thief away from the street and executed him on the spot, teaching the remaining thieves a harsh lesson about failure. The band then retreated in humiliation, riding quickly out of the city before dawn broke, leaving the body of the failed thief behind. The next morning, the captain held an emergency meeting in the cave. He addressed his remaining men. "We have lost 2 of our numbers, and yet the secret owner remains alive and now knows that we are searching for him. I will not fail again. This time, I will entrust the mission to another who must succeed." He assigned the task to a second thief, a man known for his extreme caution and meticulous planning. "Go back," the captain commanded. "Do not use chalk. Find the house again and mark it with a deep, subtle sign using a tool that no one will notice." The second thief, driven by the fear of suffering the same fate as his comrade, approached his mission with extreme caution and cold determination. He knew failure meant immediate death. He entered the city under a simple disguise and proceeded with great secrecy. This time he did not rely on the talkative tailor, but instead used his own meticulous observation, relying on the directions given by the first thief and the distinct look of Cassim's house. He spent hours quietly moving through the street, confirming the location of the wealthy, magnificent house that Ali Baba now occupied. Once he was certain of the correct door, he chose a subtle marking method that he believed no servant or resident would ever notice. He did not use chalk. Instead, he pulled a small piece of dark red stain from his pouch and drew a tiny, almost invisible red mark on the wood near the base of Ali Baba's large door. Satisfied that the mark was unique, discreet, and perfectly placed, the second thief rushed back to the mountain cave and reported his success to the captain. He described his careful planning and assured his leader that the mark would only be visible to a highly trained eye, thus avoiding the confusion of the previous night. The captain was encouraged by the thief's caution. He waited until the depth of the night before leading the 38 remaining robbers into the silent city for their second attempt. Meanwhile, Morgiana, ever vigilant, left the house to fetch water. Her eyes, sharp from the previous night's crisis, immediately swept over the surface of the large door. She quickly noticed the new mark, a small dark red stain near the bottom corner. She realized instantly that the thieves had returned and changed their plan. This mark was much harder to see, but her loyalty and fear for her master made her notice the tiny detail. Morgiana did not hesitate. She knew that marking every single door again might make the thieves suspicious of a counterplan. This time, her strategy was more selective, designed to confuse the robbers without alerting the city. She procured a small vial of red dye and began her work. She marked the door immediately next to Ali Baba's house with the same small red stain. Then, she marked the second house down. She crossed the street and marked 2 more doors that were slightly separated from the others. She only marked 6 or 7 doors in total, ensuring that Ali Baba's house was no longer unique, but that the overall pattern remained sporadic and confusing. When she finished her careful work, she returned inside, praying that her quick thinking would save her master once more. Later that night, the captain and his 38 men crept onto the street. The second thief led them directly to the door he had marked. "Captain," the thief whispered, pointing. "The mark is small, subtle, and red. It is perfectly placed." The captain examined the red stain and nodded in approval. But then, as he looked to the side, his eyes fell upon the door next to them, which bore the identical red mark. He checked the house across the street, which also bore the same mark. The captain's rage surpassed anything he had felt before. They had been fooled twice by the same house. He realized that the person they hunted was not only rich, but was incredibly cunning and intelligent, and clearly knew they were being hunted. The second thief, trembling with despair, could offer no excuse or explanation. He swore to the captain that he had not marked any other door. "Silence!" The captain roared, low and terrible. "It is clear we are dealing with a person of high intelligence, one who is mocking us. You have failed, and you have cost us another night and another comrade." Without mercy, the captain dragged the second thief away and executed him. The remaining 37 men retreated once more, humbled and terrified by the unseen, clever enemy within the city. The captain was now obsessed. He realized that relying on his men was useless. He knew that the one person who could truly identify the house was himself. He swore a solemn, deadly oath. "I will go myself. I will find the house, and I will not return until I have killed the man and every person who lives under his roof." The captain of the robbers, now working alone and driven by personal vengeance, was utterly determined not to fail. He spent the entire day carefully devising a plan that would rely entirely on cunning and direct access to the enemy's house, bypassing any need for subtle marks or secret signals. He returned to the city alone, disguised this time as an extremely wealthy oil merchant. He moved through the streets, paying close attention to the details of every great house. Relying on his excellent memory, he quickly found the large, magnificent house that Ali Baba now occupied, a house that stood out due to its size and opulence. He memorized every window, every corner, and the layout of the courtyard. He then returned to the cave and commanded his remaining 37 men to prepare for the attack. His plan was audacious and simple. First, the captain went out and purchased 40 large, heavy leather jars, the kind used by merchants to transport oil. He then secured a small quantity of high-quality oil and filled just one of the 40 jars with it. The other 39 jars were left empty. The captain's men quickly gathered the 37 remaining robbers. He instructed them to hide inside the 37 empty jars, one man per jar. This was a slow, difficult, and uncomfortable process, but the men obeyed, driven by the fear of their captain and the promise of vengeance. The captain ensured each jar was carefully sealed to allow the thief inside just enough air to breathe until midnight. The jars were then loaded onto the backs of mules. Now the captain had a total of 40 jars, one filled with oil and 37 containing his armed men. The remaining 2 jars were simply empty spares, added to maintain the believable appearance of a large consignment. He loaded the 40 jars onto his mules. Under the cover of dusk, the captain, dressed in the robes of a wealthy merchant and riding at the head of a long line of mules laden with the jars, arrived back in the city. He rode directly towards Ali Baba's house. He halted his caravan directly in front of the large gate. He struck the door firmly, and Ali Baba, hearing the noise, opened it himself. The captain greeted Ali Baba with a politeness expected between 2 wealthy merchants. He explained that he was an oil merchant who had traveled a long distance and was bringing a large consignment of oil to sell in the city's markets the following morning. "I beg you, noble sir," the captain said, feigning great exhaustion. "I'm overcome with fatigue, and the hour is late. I cannot find a safe place within the walls to stable my 40 jars and my mules for the night. If you would only grant me the hospitality to store them in your courtyard until dawn, I would be eternally grateful." Ali Baba, being a man of genuine kindness and a deep understanding of merchant ethics, could not refuse such a simple request for shelter and safety. He saw the captain merely as a fellow traveling merchant in need. "Enter, good sir," Ali Baba replied warmly. "You are welcome to rest here. My courtyard is large and secure." Ali Baba immediately instructed his servant to open the stable gates and help the captain lead the mules into the spacious courtyard. The captain, carefully directing the placement of his deadly cargo, oversaw the precise positioning of the 40 large jars in an obscure corner of the courtyard near the wall. He made sure the 37 jars containing his men were placed close together. Ali Baba then led the captain into the house, offered him a bath, and insisted he join them for supper. During the meal, the captain played the role of the tired, honest oil merchant perfectly, engaging Ali Baba in long, slow conversation about trade routes, prices, and the difficulties of transportation, the very type of detailed, dull conversation that aids sleep. Finally, the captain was led to his guest room. Before retiring, he had one final, subtle task. He told the servant he needed to check his precious oil one last time. He went back to the courtyard, went quickly to each of the 37 jars and quietly gave his men the final command. When you hear my signal, which will be a single stone dropping from my window, you must emerge silently from your jars, proceed into the house, and slaughter every soul within. Vengeance will be ours at midnight. He then returned to his room, fully expecting to achieve his bloody goal before the night was over. The 37 thieves settled in their jars, weapons drawn, waiting for the signal of death. The captain was secure in his room, confident that his plan was flawless and that his vengeance would arrive at midnight. But down in the kitchen, the loyal slave girl, Morgiana, was still at work, completing her evening duties. She noticed that the house oil lamp was running dangerously low and needed to be refilled for the long night ahead. Morgiana decided to take a small quantity of oil from one of the huge jars in the courtyard, assuming the merchant would not mind. She took a small vessel and went out into the darkness of the courtyard, moving silently towards the corner where the jars were stacked. As she approached the first jar, she lifted the lid carefully to dip her vessel inside. Before she could do so, a muffled voice hissed up at her from within the jar. "Is it time, Captain? Have you given the signal?" Morgiana froze instantly, her heart sinking with a terrible, horrifying truth. She realized immediately that this was not a jar of oil, but a jar containing an armed man. She moved quickly to the next jar, and another voice whispered the same question. And the next, and the next. She moved along the line of jars, confirming that 37 of them contained the waiting thieves. The entire courtyard was filled with deadly enemies. Morgiana's fear was instantly replaced by a cool, decisive courage. She understood that the lives of Ali Baba and the entire household were entirely in her hands. She knew she had no time to wake her master or raise an alarm. She quickly returned to the kitchen and began her own counterattack. She took the remaining oil from the one honest jar and placed it in the largest pot she possessed. She added all the oil she could find in the kitchen supplies, and then placed the enormous pot over the fire, bringing the liquid to a high roaring boil. The process was slow, deliberate, and intense, requiring a long wait for the deadly oil to reach the necessary scalding temperature. When the oil was smoking and scalding hot, Morgiana carried the huge pot out into the courtyard. She approached the first jar containing a thief, lifted the lid, and slowly, carefully, poured the entire pot of boiling oil down inside. The thief within made a single sharp cry of agony before falling silent forever. Morgiana repeated this desperate, brutal process, moving systematically along the line of jars. She poured the deadly, boiling oil into the second jar, and then the third and the fourth. It was a long, painstaking task, requiring multiple trips to the fire to reheat the remaining oil. With grim determination, she poured the scalding liquid into all 37 jars, until every single assassin within was instantly silenced and killed. The danger was over. Morgiana left the jars where they stood and returned inside the house to wait. Shortly after midnight, the captain awoke. He crept silently from his room and listened. Hearing no sound of his men, he feared his signal had failed. He walked quickly to the courtyard and approached the first jar. He whispered the password, but heard no response. He lifted the lid and, smelling the scorched air, understood the terrible calamity that had befallen his men. The captain was defeated and heartbroken. He knew he had lost his entire band and that his mission was an utter, complete failure. In despair and absolute terror, he fled the house, leaping the wall and running into the night, abandoning his remaining jars and mules. The next morning, Morgiana told Ali Baba the unbelievable truth. Ali Baba rushed to the courtyard and, upon seeing the dead thieves inside the jars, fully realized the magnitude of the danger and the incredible loyalty and bravery of his slave girl. They secretly buried the 37 bodies in their expansive garden. Ali Baba sold the 37 deadly jars, the 3 mules, and the 1 true jar of oil in the city market, maintaining the illusion of the merchant who had simply abandoned his goods. Many months passed. Ali Baba now lived a life of peace and great prosperity, believing the threat was finally over. However, the captain, driven by a deep, unforgiving hunger for revenge, was still alive. He returned to the city, disguised this time as a respected traveling merchant of spices and perfumes, and rented a shop directly across the street from Ali Baba's house. The captain spent many weeks quietly observing Ali Baba, planning his final personal assassination. Finally, he feigned great friendliness and invited himself to dinner at Ali Baba's house. During the meal, Morgiana immediately recognized the captain, not by his robes, but by the cold, fierce look in his eyes and the way he spoke. She knew his presence meant Ali Baba was in imminent danger. During the feast, Morgiana performed a traditional, elaborate dance to entertain the guests. As she danced gracefully, she pulled a small, sharp dagger from beneath her clothes. When she reached the captain, she plunged the dagger straight into his heart, killing him instantly. Ali Baba was horrified, but Morgiana quickly unveiled the plot, showing him the deadly dagger and pulling back the captain's disguise to reveal the face of the murderous robber leader. Ali Baba was overcome with gratitude. He embraced Morgiana, declaring that she had now saved his life 3 times, from the first mark, the second mark, and the jars. He immediately granted Morgiana her freedom, and as a final and lasting reward, he married her to his own son. Ali Baba lived out the rest of his long life in peace and prosperity, secure in his wealth and protected by the cleverness of his devoted family. He was always careful never to forget the magical words of the cave, "Open Sesame" and "Shut Sesame." Asterisk. And now, as Ali Baba and his family finally find their deep and lasting peace, our journey into this particular chapter of the 1001 Nights comes to a close. The secrets of the dusty, ancient mountain cave are now guarded only by the slow passing of the centuries and the echoes of the desert wind. We leave Ali Baba resting securely in his great house, his days of chopping wood and fearing thieves forever behind him. His long life a quiet testament to the rewards of kindness and the invaluable protection of loyalty. Take a moment to allow the details of this long tale to settle within your mind, dissolving any tension or distraction from your own day. Listen to the last faint whispers of the distant desert, the soft murmuring of the wind moving through the courtyard, where the deadly jars once stood. Feel the deep calm that comes with the completion of a long journey, knowing that the adventure is concluded and the danger is past. We hope the soothing rhythm of this story has guided you into a state of profound relaxation. Let your eyelids grow heavy and your breathing deepen as you drift towards a restorative, dreamless sleep. Remember that the world of ancient tales is vast, filled with many more adventures waiting to be told. When you wake, refreshed and renewed, we invite you to return to the quiet embrace of the Arabian Nights. Join us again soon for another long story, another ambient journey, and another night of perfect rest. Until then, may your mind be calm, your rest be deep, and your dreams be sweet. Good night.